Today, I think you're going to like this episode because if you ever wondered what ketamine is, for those of you that aren't working in the field, that are not healthcare professionals, there's a lot of people out there wondering, okay, what exactly is this? I heard about the Matthew Perry thing, all these things. Well, today we have an author of a book, and I really recommend you getting this book, The Ketamine Effect. It's hard to see the rest of the title down there, but the other part of the title is A Practical Guide to Understanding Ketamine Treatment. So, yes, we're going to ask questions about that. And your inner healing journey. We're going to talk about that as well. So, thank you for tuning in, and here's my interview with Dr. Les Cole, author of The Ketamine Effect. Dr. Cole, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. It's good to be here, and please call me Les.
Oh, okay. We're going to be informal. Okay.
I like it.
I like it too. Okay, thank you, Les. A book came out in, was it 2023 that you released your book?
It was 2023, correct.
I came across the book just recently, actually. I was on Amazon, as we all are nowadays, and looking for books about ketamine, and yours popped up. Seems very popular. The book is called The Ketamine Effect, A Practical Guide to Understanding Ketamine Treatment and Your Inner Healing Journey. My thoughts are here is I got tons of questions that I think the audience probably would be interested in knowing. Let's start with you and your background. So you work in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, as a psychotherapist.
That's right.
Wondering if we could wind the tape back to the 60s, because you're someone that would be able to kind of give someone watching the show an idea what it was like in the 60s. You are a veteran of the Vietnam War, right?
That is right, Greg, yes.
And was it during the war that, that influenced you to work in this field? Or like, did you have any experience at the time regarding ketamine being used, which it was back then?
That's a great question. Little revealing question to answer. I have to admit, had it not been for the draft, I would not have gone into the military at that juncture in my life. And had I not gone into the military at that juncture in my life, I am not at all sure what path my life might have taken. Man, I was just without a direction. I was in 4 families by the time I was 10. And so a lot of instability growing up, just had no direction. Enjoyed people a lot, enjoyed getting kicked out of class because I was funny a lot, but can't really say that I laid any solid foundations academically or otherwise to prepare me for a future. And so when I went into the military, it absolutely was and as I look back now, I wouldn't want to do it again, but it was absolutely pivotal because it gave me structure and allowed me to begin to grow up. And that was my first connection to pathos, just so much pain, and friends of mine who didn't come home and coming back and seeing their families, and my own pain. And came back from that 14 months in Southeast Asia. And I can honestly say literally every single facet of my world paradigm had pretty much been shattered. And a lot of, PTSD, which we didn't know what that was at that time. I was just the fellow at the VA that I saw that I loved so much just said, well, Les, you're a hot mess. That was as close as we got to PTSD. And he wasn't wrong. I was a hot mess. And, I was kind of desperate. I had a 1-year-old, 14-month-old son and married. And so I thought, well, I've got the VA GI Bill. I don't know what I'm going to do with me. The military skills that I developed were not transferable into the civilian world in a direct way anyway. And I certainly didn't want to stay in and risk another tour overseas. So when I came back from overseas, I was stationed in Lubbock, Texas. I just knew when I came home, I'd have a beautiful assignment. Well, I had Lubbock.
What was Lubbock like at that time?
Oh my God, beautiful people and just butt ugly. I mean, it's just, it's just flat. And very almost high plains desert-esque. People are wonderful, but Texas Tech University was there, and it was a good school. And I thought, well, I'll go to college, which that kind of makes me tickled now to even think back. And I really used my undergraduate degree. I focused in 5 major areas of study: psychology, sociology, anthropology, philosophy, and religion. I thought, well, if I can facet human existence, maybe I can come up with some freaking direction for my life and figure out a way to kind of stay here and be relevant to this world. And it was it really was unfoldingly a beautiful experience that began to connect some dots for me. And that's my senior year of my undergraduate program. I had enough hours, so I did a master's in counseling. Again, I just wanted to use my GI Bill, you know. Um, that was really the beginning of my love affair with both psychology and theology.
I'm sure in the last couple of years, you read that ketamine was used on the battlefield in Vietnam. And can you share what you know about that?
One of my homies when I was overseas was a medic, and that's the first time I'd ever heard of ketamine. And he was just raving about this new molecule that they had gotten. One of the biggest problems for survival was the time between being able to be air-evac'd out of the war zone to a remote hospital in the rear. And really had 2 choices: to anesthetize somebody to put them out of their pain. The problem with that is everything they had, what I remember him saying, everything they had retarded the breathing. And so you had to be intubated. Well, you can't intubate. And ketamine came along, and they could literally use it as an anesthesia without retarding the respiratory system. And so he didn't have to intubate. And so it was a wonderful thing because they could anesthetize the vet, allow him to be out of pain, body relax, which enhanced their ability to treat them because they weren't thrashing around in pain. And so that was my first introduction to ketamine. Of course, after I got home, I began to hear about Special K, et cetera. It took me a while to connect.
Right. Yeah, that's in my experience too as a therapist. That's the first time I heard about it was years ago when it was being used recreationally.
Exactly. So I was like, wow. So there is a stateside application, I see.
In the 70s, it was used therapeutically, but I'm not quite sure how. And just wondering if you could, based on your experience, let the viewer know what was going on at the time.
So, again, let me just back up here. I do not offer myself as any type of anesthesiologist, neurologist, but my research, one of the things I ran across I found was quite interesting, is that in the early 70s, again, partially because of the success in using it in Southeast Asia, what they realized that it became an alternative for older people like I am now, who were going to have a hip replacement or a knee replacement as an anesthesia that didn't have some of the high risk of intubation. And one of the things that they began to find, there's a fairly significant correlation between senior citizens, aging, depression, anxiety, et cetera. And what they began to unexpectedly identify is, our patients that we use ketamine with for an anesthesia, they are reporting improved mood, energy, decrease in anxiety, decrease in depression. And so somebody back then goes, let's look at this. And that's when they began, my understanding is, to establish the connection neurologically and around our neurotransmitters and the NMDA and the AMPA, et cetera. And my understanding, my research says that's kind of launched this whole endeavor.
Yeah.
We now look
Almost
at it
by accident, I guess it was discovered as
it's a side
official.
I think it was a side
effect. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it gained a lot of attention, as did psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, until it became so recreational prevalent that the laws changed pretty radically to prevent access. And then research really, except for a few places, kind of died out. There's been an ongoing there's a connection and a thread research-wise related to all of the psychedelics throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, and forward.
How long ago did you find out that ketamine could be used in the respect of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy? How long ago was that?
That light probably came on about 5 years ago.
Oh, really? Only 5 years ago? Yeah.
Not long ago, yeah. Before COVID, so 2018, 2019, I
Hmm.
kind of piddled with it. Quite honestly, I'd been following psilocybin more closely because the research, I don't know why I was, must have followed it on Google somehow and some algorithm realized. And so I stayed up with that. But then ketamine started trickling in, of course, way, way, way back, that affiliation. It made me interested. And I began reading the research and the impact. And, it is a less, I would describe it as a less intensive and time consuming experience compared to MDMA or psilocybin that tend to be multiple hours of experience. And there it is much more of an internal experience, while LSD, psilocybin, MDMA tend to be more environmentally focused in the experience.
Do we know a lot of what happens in the brain when someone is getting ketamine therapy, or so is someone a mystery? Or I mean, what part do you know that you can share what is going on there?
Yeah, my observation, Greg, is that we really don't know anything. We've got some pretty good hunches. I mean, we know that
Mm.
ketamine blocks NMDA receptors, and that's a type of glutamate receptor. The fMRIs have given us a great opportunity. We know more than we used to because we can study the human brain without, the person needing to be dead. So it gives us a lot of opportunity to make some really educated guesses. And that glutamate release that seems to be activating the AMPA receptors, and that cascades in the brain-derived neurotropic factor and mTOR signaling, which promotes that synaptogenesis, which is the ability to create new neural pathways. One of the exciting things about ketamine is that I feel pretty confident that the research identifies that first 72 hours, we have an unbelievable opportunity for neophyte new neural connections to be established. You talk about neuroplasticity. This is kind of
Mhm.
a steroid for neuroplasticity.
In the book, you mentioned that your experience working with clients, and when you started to use ketamine with them for ketamine therapy, that you based the book on about 1,000 hours that you and your partner, is it Dr. Timothy Giannoni? Is that correct?
That's right.
What did you find as you start using it therapeutically? As you mentioned, that 72-hour period, but also what was the first few clients like, and you start to realize, wow, this could change lives.
Yeah, what I remember back then is I was scared to death. It just I've been through the training. I've felt really confident in my skills and abilities, but to me, this was just uncharted territory, experientially. And there's just a lot of what ifs. I've read things in the past, not in a controlled medical setting, but
Hmm.
in a social setting, K-holes and, getting in, not being able to get out, and felt a huge responsibility to be able to guide during this process. But all of that tension and anxiety was quickly resolved. I think the most common thing when we talk about 1,000 now, there's a team of 5 of us who have been involved in this, and we met weekly, case consulted with each other. But one of the most common themes, that we talked about later, CCAP, and it's a uh, collective ketamine progressive narrative that the experience followed a rhythm, and it is not horribly individual. There is a rhythm to the ketamine experience. The other thing is that it just quickly, I was so impressed with 2 words that folks would use immediately following the experience. The most prevalent word was on the first experience was simply wow, wow. And the second one was a reported kinesthetic sense of space and peace.
Hmm.
Relaxation at a different level that was described. Of course, we were working with folks who had at first only treatment-resistant depression, anxiety, or PTSD. So those of us who've had any of that recognize what it means to be wound a little tight. And I think what they were describing is the release from that that became so profoundly influential, and part of the very foundation of the ongoing work we would use as we draw on those somatic components.
I'm sure people that are interested in ketamine therapy are probably asking this question about safety. I heard all these things about LSD in the 60s, and they say that ketamine is a psychedelic, and Matthew Perry, he passed away because of ketamine. How safe is it?
Incredibly. I mean, there probably isn't. I'm not offering this as a fact, but I cannot imagine LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, ibogaine, any of the other psychedelics that have the history of research around safety that ketamine does because of how it evolved. It evolved from the operating room.
Right.
So we got a ton of data on that. Matthew Perry was such an unfortunate, tragic guy. Just breaking my heart. What a weight to carry. He didn't die from ketamine. He died with ketamine in his system, along with a collection of other drugs and narcotics. Our typical ketamine tab-based implementation, the tabs would run, the dosage would, depending on body weight and constellation, etc., would run somewhere between 100 and 300 milligrams during the experience. Matthew Perry had 3,600 grams.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Ton. I mean, just massive doses. I mean, that's a sedative dose. And so we stay way below any kind of anesthetic impact. And we do a pre-screening. And I'm sure everybody does. There are certain heart conditions, there's uncontrolled blood pressure, there are some liver conditions, there are certain physiological conditions that would make ketamine not recommended. And so we always do a medical screening. And it's just a part of our protocol. We do an initial intake and exploration, and if they seem appropriate, then the next step is to meet with one of either our anesthesiologist or psychiatrist. And, if there's any question, a number of times our psychiatrists have recommended and referred to a cardiologist or a liver specialist. And when we go to the room, we know physiologically there's not concerns.
So we understand the range of doses that's therapeutic, and as you mentioned, you have anesthesiologists and other medical people there. We do this in Ontario as well, having medical people involved. And at what point did you start to realize that not only was this helpful for reducing depression and anxiety, but people were talking about, as in the title of your book, an inner healing journey? So this is going to be a strange conversation because you got two therapists talking about something that really isn't, commonly talked about. But what did you start hearing from your clients regarding the inner journey?
That has done more to reshape and reframe my thinking, Greg, than anything in my 50 years of practice. And I've been around long. CBT didn't exist when I started. I wasn't even trained in CBT. It was back in the day when I did my residency. We had to park in another parking lot, so patients couldn't even see the kind of car we drove because we were so influenced by psychoanalytic psychotherapy, which is great. I'm not criticizing. It's just so different. And so I also, was around for the development, Kohut's work in self-psychology and all of these different things that came along. And I probably have about 420 this is it's in my career where something
kind of like,
my radar.
This is the holy grail. Yeah.
Oh, this is it. This is what I've been waiting on. Got my certification, got really good at it. And, over time, maybe that's just a part of maturing or cynicism one. But I got to where, there are no this is it's. And I really entered into the ketamine treatment world with all of that, with a high level of radar for woo-woo crap, as I would call it. And I began to observe other people's experiences of transformation. And it's as well as my own. And that's probably the big tipping point. I had tried Prozac in the past. I mean, I come from a really anxious family. When I got home from overseas, there were 2 or 3, 4 years where I had a lot of trouble with panic attacks. So I didn't like how medication often would make me feel. And so I really threw myself into physical exercise and meditation. And it was so useful for me. What it allowed me to do is to create a reservoir of unresolved issues, but it was a great dam. Very rarely would anything break through the dam. But every once in a while, even, later on, there would be times, stress would build at work. And I really wasn't paying attention to my body. And next thing I know, it's like, oh, gee, am I having a heart attack? Oh, well, no, this is my panic attack here. I know what it is. Doesn't help you any. So when to be certified, the path we took for certification with ketamine, part of the week-long intensive experience was individual experience with the different modalities of administration. And I came home a week later and had this profound sense that something had shifted.
And this was unexpected going into it?
Oh, I didn't expect it at all. No. Yeah. No, I didn't expect it. I've grown to really value and emphasize set and setting and intention. My intention was to get through it, be certified. I mean, that was my intention. I had no expectations. Been disappointed a lot, I guess, across time. No sense setting yourself up. Want not, need not. And got back and, something had shifted. And the closest at first I could come to is, you know what? I don't feel like I need the dam like I used to. I'm not sure I don't think the reservoirs is full. I've found myself not reacting in ways that I had habitually reacted before. And so it really began to clue me into these patterns of adaptation that I developed, thank God, for survival, that allowed me to be highly functional, if not highly at peace. That began to, as we would talk about in a Zen world, the observing self became more and more predominant. And I began, for lack of any better language, to observe myself changing.
From outside of your body, or how would you describe that?
From reacting to external situations to being internally driven and responding.
I see.
I was able to make choices. I found myself deciding about behaviors in ways that I'd never thought of before. It really was life-changing. In my relationships, in my orientation towards life, it was like I shifted to a different gear.
I'd like to loop back to the book. I read your book, and what really stood out for me, and I guess, as therapists, if we didn't have this information, we would say this is kind of woo-woo. You speak a lot about the rigid ego and the fluid ego. My first question is, how does this ego compare to psychoanalysis and Freudian's view of ego?
Yeah, I think Freud would clearly describe the ego as the rigid ego. I mean, it's the controlling component under the influence of the superego. It's highly critical, it's highly reactive. When I think of the fluid ego and the rigid ego, I automatically think of the Wizard of Oz.
Oh, yeah.
The great and mighty Oz is the rigid ego.
Okay.
It's what we have learned to adapt out of our sense of insecurity and insufficiency. It's the personality that we have created that faces the world, that we have sought to create in other people an image of who we are that is really monosyllabic, strengths and value only, with no weaknesses included. And that was given birth and life based on a need to adapt to what would be a stressful or traumatic mismatch.
Mm-hmm.
And if it works well, guess what? We'll double down on it. And over time, if we double down on it well enough, it not only determines our behavior, but it changes our perception. So it filters what we get to experience as input from the immediate moment. And when I am totally controlled by the rigid ego, I'm living an artifact. I am not in the moment. I'm not in the present. I am projecting out onto current conditions, a past experience and belief. What we know from the way the brain works is that its primary job is to limit my perception, not expand.
Mm-hmm.
If I was taking in all the sensory data that was happening right now, I'd be overwhelmed. And so we get these personas that work. Not only do they become how we react to life, but in turn, they, for lack of a better way of expressing it, they send a message to the brain: only allow me to perceive information that is consistent with this being the response.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I become defended against, and everything in my rigid ego is a part of who I am. It's not a bad thing. It's just when a part of me portrays itself as if that's all there is to me.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
So the rigidity, I become monosyllabic reactively.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of really good stuff, as well as things we'd call not such good stuff, that it eclipses, that is much more of who I am. And I become a more brittle and less dynamic human being with fewer options and smaller breadth of experience. And it's a closed loop that keeps reinforcing until I'm fortunate enough. And in some ways, I think that's where all of us begin therapy. Go to therapy. Why? Because somebody pulled back the curtain on the Oz and they saw something or I saw something. Please help me convince myself and them that what they saw is not true. Pay no attention to the little dude behind the curtain.
When I read the book and I was reading about rigid ego and fluid ego, what crossed my mind is the limited amount of information that I have about neuroplasticity and how ketamine impacts the brain. Is that is it possible that the new neural pathways, like you said, the neophyte pathways, are developing, and that gives us a chance to observe and shift from a rigid pathway to a more fluid pathway?
That's my understanding, Greg. That the development of, and to some degree, we all, like Jung would say, we all have to develop, using my language, we all have to successfully develop some level of rigidity of our ego. That's a sense of constant self. And if we are fortunate enough to do that well enough across time, and then we're blessed, something will happen that causes that to fail us. And that's what Jung talked about as midlife crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I think, the way I've come to understand the dynamic is what ketamine does is it dissociates me from the unilateral sole control of the rigid ego.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of lets that poor part of me take a break. And while it is a dissociative, deconditioning experience, what gets very little airplay is I think it is dissociative and deconditioning in service of reassociation and reconditioning. It allows us to get back to the more of who we are. So we dissociate from a part of who we are in service of being able to experience and get access to the whole much more of who we are. The innate healing, the innate wisdom, the innate ability to assess and respond as opposed to be threatened and react.
What's occurred to me, and some people talk about the use of psychedelics as a way to reboot, and I'm not quite sure if I would agree with that word, but what occurred to me here, the way you're explaining it, is it possible that the analogy would be a restart of our computer?
Yeah, that's an interesting framework. I'm getting a little bit out on the limb given my age. Computers are not my big thing, but what does strike me is the rigid ego, another way of talking about it, is our learned operating system.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know, when I'm using Windows and I click a button and it opens a file, I think I clicked a button and it opened a file. I don't get to see what went on behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as whatever's going on, you know, I guess that would be the DOS language or whatever they're up to now, whatever's going on behind the curtain is creating the image of what I'm appearing to see. When you change the OS, you get to see a whole lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say it expands our operating system, which is kind of counter-neurological, as the brain's job basically is to filter down, not to expand up.
I would like to get into talking about the default mode network. And viewer, I'm sorry if I'm going above, but Les is going to explain this a little bit probably better than I can. But what's occurred to me, if I loop back to the neuroscience, is that if there is this 72-hour period after ketamine where there's an improvement in mood, isn't depression based on chemistry? Isn't depression about our, low serotonin? I'm trying to wrap my head around what chemically is going on, or maybe I'm way off. I don't know.
Well, my personal opinion is, I think, Greg, serotonin reuptake and SSRIs, SNRIs are what, 30% effective to the population? I mean,
Right. Yeah.
if it was a serotonin shortage that made me depressed, give me some serotonin and I'd be off and running. Some people are.
Yeah, good
Most
point.
people aren't.
Yeah.
I mean,
Doesn't fix everything. Yeah.
doesn't fix a lot. And I think a part of that is that when we have depression and anxiety, PTSD, we adapt to that state. And just because I have a reduction in symptoms doesn't mean I have a concomitant growth in skills and awareness.
Mm.
So I may feel better and act my way right back into the pit. So, ketamine, I just don't, to me, the jury's still out as to depression and anxiety. I really think are constellations that involve many brain regions, not just the lack of this or the lack of that. And, when we talk about the default mode network, I mean, the way I think about that exactly as you described, this is our learned operating system.
Okay.
And it's default. And what do I mean? What does it mean when we say something is default? It means it just happens unless we do something else. You have to override a default system. And so it comes from an interconnected, it too is a network process. And it is what is engaged when we're not directly involved in an external exchange. Like I'm exchanging with you right now.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the other times when we're not directly engaged in something, when I'm directly engaged, it's running in the background. Otherwise, it creates this self-referential engagement where I start daydreaming. I start worrying about the future. I start ruminating about the past. I start thinking about myself, about thinking about what others do or don't do for me or with me. I construct these narratives about the meaning of my life, which is all this mental chatter. And the mental chatter is designed ultimately to reinforce the default mode.
Yeah, it would.
Keep me stuck.
Yeah.
Why? But because why? What fires together wires together.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a whole bunch. Medial, prefrontal cortex is involved, posterior cingulate, inferior parietal, hippocampus. These are all things that are part of the DMN or the default mode network and contribute to, as you can see, they can contribute to this excessive rumination, excessive self-awareness, excessive self-criticism, negative internal loops, future orientation about triggering anxiety, past, depression, etc. So this is, in a way, what keeps us stuck and what keeps us safe. What's familiar is always comforting until I realize what's familiar is more of a cell than a safety net. And so what I really have observed in my experience, personally and otherwise, what ketamine does is it temporarily quiets the default mode network.
Oh, it doesn't turn it off. I thought it turns it off. It
Well, it does
quietens it.
absolutely in the experience. It during the experience, it gets a chance to rest.
Okay. Yeah.
Again, part of that's dosage related. But we always have started off very low in dosage. And because some people, I mean, for example, a man, I'm 6'2", 230. The average dose for my size would be 400 grams of ketamine. At 150, I am toast. So I'm highly sensitive. So we and everybody's going to scale dosage so that people who go, well, I don't want too much. You're not going to get too much. I mean, you will be working with people who are going to help you identify that sweet spot of dosage. But when we're in the sweet spot, you absolutely, during the experience, have an elimination. And that's the feeling of dissociation. When I don't have my typical identity available to me, there's that sense of kind of cosmic awareness, kind of oneness. I'm no longer limited life outside the cell. So that, but it also, during that experience, when the default mode network no longer is dominant or executively conditioning my experience, I then experience more of who I am. And initially, especially, that tends to be more somatic and experiential than cognitive. The ketamine experience is often more related to a dreamlike state than it is a logical discussion. A lot of metaphors, a lot of imagery, a lot of bodily feelings and experience. And a lot of those things are things that I have varied for survival at that time. Things that were overwhelmingly threatening to me at 5. Obviously, because I'm sitting here, I was successful at being able to bracket or bury. The wonderful thing about that is it gives you a chance to grow, and you may have some areas of delayed development, but you continue to move down life's path. The challenge to that is at 65, when I take the lid off of that well and these experiences come back to me, they come back to the part of me that's still 5 and stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So it can feel overwhelming. Why? Because that's when I dissociated from it. And so we work, that little boy at 5 didn't have the 65-year-old man to comfort and approach, to control, to help, support, validate, etc. So it creates a whole new dialogue interiorly between the parts of who I am. And as my response and those parts come up, I'm able to embrace, value them with compassion and empathy. In one of my early ketamine sessions, this is something I was really afraid of. I did not want to have a flashback. I did not.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, dude, you guys are crazy. You want me to risk what I've worked 50 years to stay away from? Have you lost your damn mind? And my first couple were absolutely fine, but the third time, it was like IMAX, like, dude. But what was so profoundly different in the ketamine experience, if you have a re-experiencing of traumatic events, you will do it as an observer, not a participant.
Uh-huh.
So I knew that the guy that I was watching in this horrible situation, I knew it was me, but I wasn't feeling what he was feeling. What I was feeling was that poor kid. Oh, how traumatic. So young to be exposed to such horror. And it changed my whole relationship to that kind of an experience for me. And so, the default now was infused with compassion. I felt with that kid. I felt like that kid felt me being with him. And again, all interior. But it so changes and reframes the narrative in a way that has integrity as opposed to something being superimposed. And that changed my default mode.
What occurs to me is you touch on observation of self. You've used the word self a number of times, and we talked about this on the phone. Actually, we're both do meditation, so there is that relative thing between meditation and the use of these molecules. But what comes to mind is, as therapists, we talk to our clients about authenticity and true self. Is that where we're trying to get them to get to?
That's what we're inviting them to let free.
Ah, okay.
It's there.
It's within.
It is absolute. If at 74, I'm completely convinced that self or soul, whatever you want to call it, is a lifelong adventure of discovery. We are always becoming more than we were. And the rigidity just keeps us in a cell. And if we can, let go and open up and trust the process called frickin' life, which, think about Kerrville. Yeah, go ahead and say, yeah, sure, Les, I'm going to trust that. Thank you, buddy. But at the same time, it is that adventure that allows us to open ourselves up. There's few days that go by now, Greg, that I am not, at the end of the day, I don't lay my head down and there's not something that has happened through me that doesn't surprise me. Like, wow. Huh. Wow.
I bet a question that people are thinking is, this is amazing. I mean, there's all these benefits, but also this insight into ourselves and letting go and all this. And they're probably wondering, does this happen in one session, or how many sessions does it take to get there?
It is not a light switch. I would say that it's so funny to say that, having been a therapist, that I've always said the reason I ended up being a therapist was it was the only way that I could afford the amount of therapeutic encounter I needed to move forward in life in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's a lifelong process. I mean, I love the word psychotherapy comes to us out of the Greek, which literally translates care of the soul.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
yeah.
Care of the soul.
Care of the soul. And whether you're religious or non-religious, atheist or universalist or whatever your framework, soul has been, when you look at the etiology of that word throughout eons, it really does describe the essence of who someone is, the essence. And, I think we are all, if we are freed up, we are always unfolding to the more of life. I'm 74. There's a lot I can't do physically that I used to be able to do. So there's a lot I've lost. But, oh my God, I wouldn't trade my experience of my days today for any previous time in my life. And, I think that's where it is a process, but it will give you the introduction to the more of you that you then become honed and practiced at following, not creating. This is not my life, but I get to live it.
Like a story, like a movie, you think?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any question. Well, I think it's all about narrative. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just the encounter, our time together, two very short, brief conversations, but, when people share the same space, I mean, I have learned more about what lights me up in two short conversations with you than I knew before.
Mm.
Wow. When you were talking to Greg about that, dude, you really lit up. Wow. And I make a note about that. Oh, I want to pursue that. Wow. Definitely want to flan. So that ketamine, number one, it flat addresses symptomology, which keeps us stuck. Number two, it certainly has a profound potential to introduce me, for lack of a better term, my healing or inner guide, mine, the more of who I am, that has never before been really safe, because I've, coming from trauma and stress, developmental challenges. I want to be in control, captain of my ship. My gosh, look at the cultures we live in. And shifting to, the biggest shift for me since I've done ketamine and done this work is I've gone from really being influenced that I am responsible to be the captain of my ship and all that goes with that. And now I'm absolutely convinced that my life is this wonderful little leaf in the stream called life. Sometimes the stream is beautiful and placid. Sometimes it's whitewater rapids and just scares the hell out of me. Sometimes it's a little eddy and I feel like I'm not going anywhere. My job is the attitude and the atmosphere on my leaf. That's it. And as I pay attention to that, then my other job is just to observe the trip. Wow, did you see that? Whoa, that's cool, isn't it? Wow, look at that. Yeah, to be present. To me, that's the gift and the work that ketamine absolutely facilitates and enhances. I can't say that there are people that I've worked with who haven't achieved the same level of insight that folks who use ketamine have, but I can tell you it didn't take them as long. And it's hopefully it's not something we're done with. It is something that becomes a lifestyle,
Evolving.
A way of being. Absolutely, Greg.
In the book, something that I had a hard time grasping. I think I kind of understood it, but in your book you talk about the CKPM, which is the well, we'll touch on it briefly because I think we could probably spend another hour on it because it was just fascinating. Common ketamine progression narrative. Well, what is that, and why did you develop it?
Oh, that's so great. I have a problem. There's a lot of wisdom in that. That really is Tim's baby. And what we were trying to identify is this progressive narrative of ketamine. It starts with the preparation. That's where we work really hard on informed consent, how important expectation setting is, a lot of psychoeducation. That's the first step of the first component of the progressive narrative. The second one is induction. This is where you do the actual administration of the ketamine, whether it's IV, IM, tabs, or whatever. There's the therapeutic intervention of the molecule. The third step would be the activation. That's the symptom relief, altered cognition, and emotional release within the context of the experience itself. Then it goes after the experience, when we're doing CAP, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, the next step is, we spend the last 30, 45 minutes in integration, reflecting on the experience, looking for the metaphors that emerge, anchoring the psychosomatic experiences somatically, being able to work with interoception around that, being able to anchor that, create embedded learning from that. And then the last step is the follow-up, where we have ongoing, somebody has a ketamine treatment on Friday. I'll follow up with them on Saturday just to touch bases. They'll have some homework for anchoring and integration. I'll follow up on Tuesday. Just how's it going? Little course corrections. That's part of the follow-up. So preparation, induction, activation, integration, and follow-up are the components of the CCAP and or the common ketamine progressive narrative. Quite honestly, there's a lot there, a little bit underdeveloped. And we've probably, though there certainly is the value in that, if people think about doing ketamine, there is a process you can trust. And you should look for whoever you work with, they should have emphasis on preparation, induction, activation, integration, and follow-up. If any of those pieces are missing, find somebody else. You can have an IV ketamine treatment. It's going to take you 45 to 50 minutes. And when you're done, you will have symptom cessation. And when you walk out the door, that cessation will begin to extinguish with time. If you really do the work of benefiting from what you've learned in a very different format during the experience, you nurture and challenge the neuroplasticity to be able to augment and expand and make really fluid that DMN, that default mode network, the fluidity of personality, to be able to kind of let yourself really expand and grow, then you're talking about being on your way to a different kind of existence.
That approach is integral. I agree, based on, my training and working in this so far, and your comment about IV, which is great for some people,
Yeah.
but this is kind of what is going to happen. I read somewhere that actually that whole idea of preparation, induction, the integration that comes afterwards actually came from Timothy Leary. I'm not sure if you knew that, but I was kind of shocked that even back then in the 60s, they're seeing this benefit of not just using the molecule that he suggested, among many things that Timothy Leary suggested.
Well, and it doesn't, I mean, this is what I mean. God, it's so cool to live and learn. And, I know in the shamanic communities, they don't use that language, but they have every step.
Oh, yeah? Yeah.
Every step. Yeah. And, I have IVs in so many ways, IV and IM administration. The process is so much more efficient and quick. I mean, for example, an IV, typically you're looking at a 45 to 50 minute. You come in, you get hooked up, you get the administration of the molecule, they stop the molecule, 5 minutes, you're walking out the door, it's done. 100% bioavailable, and recovery is almost zero. You use the tabs, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes of swishing it around in your mouth to be able to get it activated in your system. Bioavailability is about 30-35%, not 100. And then you swallow it. Because it's digested, it makes it a longer, slower, less intense experience, which I think there's some value in. But then you kind of come out slower and you may be a little fuzzy for the next couple of hours. It's not good or bad either or. But if you do the IV, the folks in the Toronto area, they need to get with a Greg Rennie type of dude or dudette and work with the experience and its meaning. That's where change comes from. Otherwise, do not waste the opportunity to expand your mind, to steal a Leary statement. Yeah, and it is mind expand, because there's more to you than you have been allowed to have access to for survival. Thank God that's true. But, we can outgrow that.
Earlier on, you're talking about your first experience hearing about ketamine. And when I first heard about ketamine, I did the same thing. I've had clients that, have talked about the ability to go down the K-hole and things like this. But what did turn me around is when it was explained to me that there has to be this type of protocol. Then as a therapist, I go, okay, I get it. The other thing that I noticed is that the experiences people have, you can't deny it. I mean, it's in research, but also these quotes from people, you can't deny it. That there is something similar in what I have experienced in meditation. We talked about that on the phone too. Where is that connection, or is it just all the same thing? What do you think?
It's really interesting, because when I think about my orientation to Zen, it's about no self.
Mm-hmm.
And the language that we've used in the ketamine effect is about the fluid self. And I think they're the same thing, because the metaphor of the fluidity, you can take a cup and dip it into the river, and you've gotten a little bit of the river, but you'll never, ever get that same piece of the river again. Now, has the river changed? No, It's fluid. And part of the fluidity that I think Zen Buddhism, I think Buddhism in general, I think a lot of Islam points to this in Christianity, this more than self. And that's why I kind of like this idea that, I think there's a tremendous parallels in the experience. And I think we're tapping it. I think there's many roads leading to the same home.
Well, I mean, there's a million questions I could ask, and we could be here for for a number of hours. But as I mentioned to you, we usually wrap up our shows with the person's favorite quote. You gave me two of them, and I was thinking, well, do I use one and not the other? But I'd love to hear your feedback on both of them. And I got to tell you, I was concerned about the one because I'm not going to pronounce it properly. It is Latin, is it not?
Yeah, unfortunately. It took me a long time. Yeah. Vocatus atticu non vocatus Deus adorit. That was over the door of Carl Jung's office.
Ah.
And the translation is bidden or unbidden, God is present.
That author was
it comes from way, way, way back. He stole it from a Greek. I can't remember the guy's name now. But yeah, it's attributed to Jung, but he borrowed that from early Greek history.
The other quote's from Carl Jung.
It is, and that
this
is
one I can pronounce. I love it, and this is how we'll end, it'd be a great way to end the show.
Yeah.
The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed.
In our time together, Greg, as short as it has been, and today I've certainly experienced this. There's a great biblical statement that says, where two or three are gathered. And when he talks about two chemical substances both being transformed, when we have the capacity as human beings to be present with another human being, we become gathered together, in which we are both more of who we are individually than we've ever been before. And that's living, man. Whoa. So appreciate the time to gather with you, Gregory.
Hey, the book is a gift. I really recommend it. The Ketamine Effect. You can find it on Amazon. I read it. I love the insight. I learned a lot, and it really is a gift. This conversation with you, Les, really is a gift. I really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. So, Dr. Les Cole, thank you very much for being here.
Greg Rennie, thank you for all you do, my man. Be well.
You too.
Bye-bye.